So I wasn't tagged to do this. My friend Janet, who did this on her channel, said that she was going to do an open tag. So I decided to um, do the reader confessions question list that she did for her channel just because I was intrigued by it and I wanted to do my own. I don't really put out a lot of content because I'm pretty inconsistent with literally everything in my life. So I'm just going to do it while I've got the energy and the mindset to do it, and it's a nice day, and whatever. So it's a list of questions that I'll put down in the description, but I'm going to read off. I wrote them down so that I could reference them because I'm bad at remembering things. So anyway, let's start off with question number 1, shall we? Question number 1. Have I ever damaged a book? As a kid, probably. I can't remember. Recently, in my adult life, I did accidentally damage a book. And I say accidentally, it wasn't because I was intending to. It just happened. I was reading one summer at camp, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, and I don't remember if it was like in my backpack and a water bottle leaked, or I put it out on a wet table or something. I don't remember how it happened, but you can probably see a little bit here how it's like wavy. The book got wet. It's not unreadable. It's just a little annoying because like the last 50 pages or so are a little bit, wavy from water damage. But yeah, I think that's the worst that I've done. I mean, when you're reading a book, when I'm reading a book, sometimes the spine will get a little damaged. I've been trying to be good about that because I like when the books look nice, and I like, the integrity of the book. But yeah, that's the one I could think of, the one that's damaged on my bookshelf from me. But to go on to the next question, the next one being, have I damaged a book that I borrowed? And I want to say no, but I do have an example of someone damaging a book that they borrowed from me. When I was in high school, I got World War Z. I think it came out in, I want to say, like 2006 or something, around about there. But I just remember I had it in high school, and I read it in like 3 days. Really quick book, really fun book. But I let my aunt borrow it, and then I let my buddy borrow it, and as you can see, it's the front cover was ripped off, and I actually taped it so that it could still be on there. And it's kind of destroyed the spine a little bit. Probably from being, from doing this, but I don't know. I haven't personally damaged a book that I can think of that I borrowed from someone else. Recently I've been borrowing books, like me and my friend Chad from the podcast. We will share books with each other. I haven't damaged any of his books. He hasn't damaged any of my books, thankfully. But, this is over 10 years ago. And, people are rough with shit. Does it take me a long time to read a book? That's question number 3. How long does it take me to read a book? It all depends. Some books I can read in a couple of days if I have the free time, or if I have the mental fortitude to do that. Like I said, with World War Z, I remember reading that book in like 2 or 3 days back in high school. Most recently, I read The Dark Forest, which is a part of a trilogy that Cixin Liu wrote back in like 2008, 2009. That was translated from Chinese in brought to the States in like 2015, 2016. The first book being The Three Body Problem. But this book I read in like 2 or 3 days recently. But other books can take months. Like this one, for instance, The Brothers Karamazov, which is a Dostoevsky novel. I started reading this, I want to say, in 2016. And it took me probably 6 months to read this. Mostly because I started reading it before I went to summer camp the first year. And this isn't, I mean, to me, this isn't I'm just going to read this, between classes at camp and in my free time. Like, it's a thick book. It's a dense book. It's not one that you can just sit down and read for 5 minutes and then put back, which I tried to do. I eventually finished it, and it's one of like my favorite books, but it took me a really long time to read. So yeah, the time it takes me to read a book from start to finish really depends on the book. It depends on how much free time I have, how in the mindset I am to read a book. Because sometimes I might have all the free time in the world, but I really just don't feel like reading a book. I'm just one of those people. I'm not one of those people who are on like book YouTube or Goodreads or whatever who read like 100 books a year. I think my best amount of books read in a year was I want to say 15. I read 15 books in 1 year, which is a lot for me. But I've seen people who read twice as much, 3 times as much in a year. I know people, like this whole quarantine thing, people are like, oh, I got all this time to read. And I'm like, yeah, I had a bunch of free time too, but, I just didn't have the mental fortitude to sit down and read, considering the state of the world. That's just me. The fourth question is, are there any books I haven't finished? And I assume that's like books that I own. Out of about 86 books that I have on my bookshelf, I want to say maybe a third of them, maybe, I don't want to say half. I don't want to say half I haven't read, but maybe closer to a third of them I haven't read all the way. That doesn't mean I haven't tried to read them. Some books I've started and stopped and started and stopped. This one, for instance, is one that I picked up. I read Three Body Problem in 2015 in like a couple days. I zoomed through that one. And then when this one came out, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll read it. Tried picking it up, read, I think, the prologue, and like not even halfway through. Oh, it's not structured with chapters, but like 3 or 4 pages in, and I'm like, nah, I really don't want to read it. And then I put it down, and I tried to pick it up like a year later. It didn't work. So a lot of the books that I have a desire to read. I wouldn't buy them if I didn't want to read them. It's just, like I said, I don't have the mental fortitude to pick one up. Maybe it just doesn't click. That happens too. I know that deep down I want to read it because the story intrigues me, or the author is someone I like, or whatever reason why I'm interested in it, but it just doesn't, at that moment, it just doesn't do it for me. And that has led me to own a lot of books, but not have read all of those books I've owned. And I know a lot of people, especially reader type people, they'll have like a backlog of books. I would say I have a backlog, but I also have a lot of books that I've started and stopped a lot. I'd say more of that, but what can you do? Question 5. Are there any hyped or popular books that I didn't like? I try not to buy books based on popular hype. I try not to. I really don't read a lot of contemporary stuff, to tell you the truth. A lot of the stuff that I have on my bookshelf is either a classic or like mid-century American or um, kind of not esoteric stuff, but just I don't own like the Harry Potter series. I don't really own any. I don't own. Oh, I don't want to say any YA. I have like 2 YA novels. Um, I don't know. I don't get drawn to books really because of their hype or popularity. Really, I worked at a bookstore, and most of the stuff that I was interested in was different works on authors I already knew I liked. So I was just looking to pick up more of their work. But if I had to pick one that I didn't like, that is kind of a hyped book, I guess, or that was hyped to me, told to me that, this is a really good book in this genre. You should read it, If you like this and this, you might like that. And it was Nosferatu, which is a Joe Hill book, who's Stephen King's son. And I'm not into it. Well, I wasn't into it. I don't think I read a lot of it. Can't really remember it. This wasn't my thing. And like I said, when it comes to that kind of stuff, like popular hyped books, I kind of shy away from that stuff. I'm a bit of a douchey hipster when it comes to stuff like that. Like, I don't watch shows that people say are really popular. I don't read books that people say are really popular. I don't do that, and it's kind of the I'm not gonna be a follower. Everyone watched Breaking Bad, never saw it. Everyone watches The Walking Dead. I fucking hate that show. It's just like, I don't know, contrarian. I guess the contrarian in me doesn't really care for popular stuff. I don't know. Number 6. Are there any books that I wouldn't tell anyone that I'm reading? I guess that I own or that I'm interested in. And I would say no. There really isn't anything that I'm ashamed of that I have or that I've read or that I'm reading. Frankly, I don't care, really. I've got a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, a lot of classics, a lot of nonfiction. And I say a lot by my standards. I don't really own a million books. Like I said earlier, I've only got like 86 books on my bookshelf. But to me, 10 books in a genre, that's a lot. To me, I only really started buying books to keep and to have, and to read multiple times in like my mid-20s, and I'm 30 now, so I haven't really been doing it a long time. But I wouldn't say I've got anything that I wouldn't want people to know that I read, or that I've been reading, or that I couldn't discuss or defend having read. I'm not really that bothered about it. And then number 7 is how many books that I own. I don't know how many books that I've read throughout my entire life. Excuse me. But like I said, I've got about 86 books, not counting the manga that I have. If I counted the manga, it'd be over 100, I think. Because I've got like the whole series of DBZ, a handful of Gundam, a handful of Bleach, a handful of Dragon Ball, a handful of Rurouni Kenshin, and I started to pick up the Evangelion manga, but I didn't count them with the rest of them. And I just thought of this, I do have like the same book a couple times. Like I've got Jurassic Park and Lost World paperback, which is what I bought first, and then I've got Jurassic Park and Lost World, and like one of those Barnes and Noble collector's edition hardbacks. And then I've got a couple actually right over here. I'm trying to do this backwards is tough, so I'm trying to do okay. Nope, that's the whiskey. In here, these books here. This is a compilation of H.P. Lovecraft, and this is a compilation of H.P. Lovecraft. So, technically they're the same. They've got a lot of the same stuff in them. The one all the way over here, oh, okay. This one here is supposed to have all of them. It's supposed to be the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft, so that's kind of a double. So, like 84 books, whatever. Have I read all of them? No. Like I said earlier, there's probably a third of them I haven't read all the way. I haven't read that entire completed works of H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah. Will I? Who knows? We'll see. Number 8, am I a fast or slow reader? I would say, in terms of finishing books, it depends, like I said before. Some books I can read in a couple days, some books in a couple months. Am I a fast, page reader? Do I read quickly? I'd say yes. I'm more a fast reader in that sense than a slow reader. That's pretty much all I have to say about that one. Oh, shit. Number 9, if I only had one book that I could have. I don't know. I really don't know, because I like a wide range of things, and I don't think... Maybe I'll go based off of this. A couple people say that, I read this same book every year. I've got a friend, excuse me, I've got a friend who has read Lord of the Rings a bunch. It's like, oh, I read this one every year. I read the trilogy, or I read the Fellowship every year, for the past decade or whatever. For me, that's kind of like, yeah, a book that you would reread. If it would be one that you'd want to be the only one. Thus far, while I have a lot of books that I'd like to reread, the only one that I've read multiple times so far is Jurassic Park. So maybe it would be that. I don't know. Maybe after 3 readings, I'll be like, yeah, that's enough. I really don't, I don't want to read it again. Or maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not that dead set on that being my one, but for this thing here, that'll be good enough for me. Number 10, are there any classics I don't enjoy? Of all the classics I own, the hardest one to get through was probably Dracula, just because of its method of how it was written. Since it's a compilation, I know there's a term for it, but there's a compilation. It's a compilation of journal entries and news articles and recordings that are then written down and all these sort of things, instead of just a straight narrative structure. So it was hard to pick up and read. It doesn't make me dislike the story. I eventually listened to an audio dramatization of it. Excuse me. I listened to an audio dramatization of it where each character was played by a different voice actor. Tim Curry plays Van Helsing, which is pretty cool. And it just made it easier to digest, because when it was presented in that fashion, especially for the parts that are audio recordings, it just made it easier to take the information and keep it. Though I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy. I don't think any of the classics I own, I don't enjoy. My endeavor to start reading again was fueled by my desire to read classics. I wanted to read Crime and Punishment. I wanted to read Frankenstein again. I wanted to read Dracula. I wanted to read these books that you read in high school. Again, I read Fahrenheit 451. Again, I don't own it, but I went back and read all of these books that are like academic English class books, and they're some of my favorite books. I don't think I dislike any of them, and I say I prefer a lot of those to the contemporary books that I've read, to tell you the truth. Number 11, books that I've bought for the intellectual-ness of them. I would say partially the classics that I just described. I do own a fair amount of nonfiction, and a lot of it initially was fueled by late 2000s, early 2010s new atheism that I was in college, that I was involved in, I guess, intellectually. Like one of the oldest books on my shelf is The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. I don't think I didn't buy it to make myself look smart. I bought it because I wanted to read it. Plus, I don't think I never really go into book buying for that end. I like a lot of the World War I era history books that I own, I bought because I'm interested in the time period. I want to learn more about it. Does it make me look intellectual? I don't know. I bought a book about consciousness because I was interested in reading about that. I bought a couple books about the universe in physics. I've bought books about genetics, which is actually this white book right here called Hacking Darwin. It's about human genetics and stuff like that. I don't buy them to flaunt anything, mostly because my bookshelf isn't like seen by people. It's really only seen by me. So it's not like I've got guests over and they're like, "Oh, let me look at your book collection. Oh, you've got this book about blah blah blah." That must mean, and I don't buy or read books for that. I mostly buy and read them either for entertainment reasons or because I want to learn something. If that makes me look intellectual, cool. If it doesn't, cool too, I guess. And number 12, books that I haven't returned that I've borrowed. There's only one I can think of, and it's Looking for Alaska. It's a book. It's a book that I borrowed from a friend from camp. Her name's Jill, and I haven't returned it because I haven't seen her in a long time. I was living in Maine. The camp was in Maine. I was living in Maine 2018 to 2019. Like summer of 2018 to summer of 2019, I lived in Maine. And she let me borrow it in late 2018, but I hadn't seen her. I haven't seen her pretty much since she let me borrow the book. So I'd like to give it back. I wanted to give it back before I moved back to Kentucky, but circumstances. So Jill, if you see this, I'm sorry. I still have your book. It's in good condition. I haven't done anything to it. But yeah. So those are all the questions. I'm surprised this doesn't have like, what's your favorite book? What's your least favorite book? Questions like that. It's more, I feel like some of the questions are repeated. I mean, if I could totally add that question to the list. Let me make sure. Yeah. Question 13. What's my favorite and least favorite books? So my favorite books right now that I would consider my favorite books are The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I read that book in like 4 days. I had a very strong emotional response from that book. I won't go into detail about it. I think I've talked about it before on the channel, maybe during one of my, book club books, book club videos. That one's up there. Crime and Punishment is up there. Dostoevsky and just in general. I would rather say who my favorite authors are instead of my favorite books, because usually my favorite books, there's a range, and it's because of these authors. So just to make this quick, my favorite authors in no particular order are Dostoevsky, Murakami, who wrote Kafka on the Shore, among other books, and Kurt Vonnegut. Those three are up there. Michael Crichton is a favorite author of mine. I haven't read a lot of his stuff. The ones that I have read, I do enjoy. I really like him because Jurassic Park is my favorite movie. But purely writing and books, it's Dostoevsky, Haruki Murakami, and Kurt Vonnegut. And my least favorite, while I do like Philip Pullman for The Golden Compass, I think the two other books in the trilogy, his Dark Materials trilogy, are terrible. It was a fucking, pulling hair to read those other two books, The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass. I was just like, God, I just want this to be finished. And it sucks because I loved the first one. I couldn't put The Golden Compass down. I took it on vacation to Florida, and instead of enjoying the beach, I sat inside and read. You're on vacation. You can do whatever the hell you want. I had no obligation to go see the beach. People be like, "Oh, you're wasting." Like, no, I do whatever I want with my time. I can read a book. So it was really disappointing that the other two were not as engaging to me or as good to me. Maybe it was because maybe I'll need to read them again in the future and I'll enjoy them more then, but I don't know. Another book that I was really interested in, that I hated, absolutely hated, was Mortal Engines. I saw the trailer for the movie, and I was really, I've been into steampunk type stuff for a long time. So to see something like that being turned into a movie, I'm like, I need to read the source material. I need to. And I hated it. It's YA. It's not my style. I'm not big into YA stuff. If you know me, you know my reading habits, you know my writing habits. I hate YA. I think it's too simple. I know it's geared for a younger audience, the whole, young adult part, but it's just, it's because it's for young people doesn't mean it needs to be trash. This is just my opinion. So I hated that. I gave it a bad review on Goodreads, and then one of my friends was like, well, do you think that's good that you gave it, since it wasn't written for you? I'm like, just because it wasn't written for me doesn't mean I can't critique it being on good or bad writing, And it's not that I hate these, they're taking me a long time to get into. Are like Brandon Sanderson novels, like the fantasy stuff, and high fantasy just in general. For me, I think it's more of a visual thing and less of a reading thing. Like I really love high fantasy concept novels and movies and games, but books, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence on how I feel about it. Like, it took me a really long time to read Mistborn. And it's not a hard book. It just took me a long time to get through it. I brought up Eye of the World earlier. This one here. I haven't finished it. And this is like a 17-book series. And I don't know if I'm going to spend all of the time reading every single one, or even finishing this one. The reason why I picked out books like this, books like The Way of Kings, which is a Brandon Sanderson novel, or The Wizard's First Rule by Terry Goodkind, is that I wanted to read some fantasy novels because I had an idea for a fantasy novel just to see how they were written and how they sound, and I realized that they're not really my type of book. So that's all I got to say about that. But this has gone on far enough. That's my reader confession tag. I'm gonna do the same thing that Janet did. I'm gonna leave it open to whoever wants to do this. Chad, if you want to do this, feel free. I'd be interested to see your answers to these questions. But yeah, readers' confessions with one extra question. So, all right. See you guys later.